Thank you all for joining us today, both in person here and online for our timely session, Shut Down, Spied On, and Stalked, the state of digital rights and gender identity. Before getting started, we just want to go over a few housekeeping matters. This is a hybrid event. Want to note that most of our main speakers are present here with us in New York. Nonetheless, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So please feel free to engage by writing your comments, reactions, and posing any questions that you would like to the panelists and others on the YouTube chat, which we will be actively monitoring. To start off, my name is Laura O'Brien, and I'm the Senior UN Advocacy Officer at Access Now. And as mentioned, we're convening here in New York City on the sidelines of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, more commonly referred to as CSW, yet another UN acronym, which is the main UN organ responsible for promoting gender equality worldwide. We're also here one day after International Women's Day, so let's give a shout out to all the women around the world. And as you may know, this year, CSW has chosen innovation and technology as its priority theme for its 67th session. And the internet is a vital resource for people to access education, economic, and healthcare opportunities, to connect within and across communities, share their opinions, and defend human rights. But many women and girls in all of their diversity and those who defend their rights are far more likely to be exposed to the dark side of the internet, from being harassed or doxxed, surveilled by state actors, having their education or livelihoods disrupted by governments hitting the kill switch. My organization, Access Now, has taken this opportunity to draw out the links between digital rights and women's rights. And together with Wikimedia, we have convened a group of experts from diverse fields, from the digital rights space to open knowledge, content creation, and civic space. And a lively discussion, we will aim to discuss the work streams at the United Nations, including the Global Digital Compact process, with an emphasis on gender equality and sexual rights activism, the fight against internet shutdowns and in the Keep It On movement and beyond, and how others can join in that fight. And then finally, strengthening digital security and data privacy practices while engaging more safely in online platforms and services. But first, on the topic of internet shutdowns, a growing problem with particular devastating impacts on women, let's hand it over to a true expert, Access Now's Keep It On campaign manager, Felicia Anthonio, who will present the latest findings on internet shutdowns around the globe. And a reminder to engage in the chat by writing your comments, your reactions, your questions, which we will cover at the end of the presentation. Felicia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Laura. And give me a second to set up my presentation. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you to discuss issues threatening our participation online. And so I would walk you through the findings of our Keep It On report, and then we can dive into the conversation today to discuss what we've been working on, what we've been up to, and what we are looking forward to this year. See what's happening. It's not loading.
Just bear with us as we get through. Here we go.
Okay. Yes, but I need my own screen. Okay. Sorry about this.
Yeah, escape.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, my name is Felicia Anthonio. I'm the Keep It On manager, as my colleague Laura has already introduced me. And most of you in this room are part of the Keep It On campaign. You are partners. You've been through this journey with us all. And so we are happy to have you in this room. So the Keep It On campaign, for those watching or following us online, it's a global campaign that unites over 300 organizations today around the world. And our main objective is to fight internet shutdowns. And this campaign was launched in 2016 during Access Now's RightsCon event in Silicon Valley. And so mainly we brought together diverse civil society organizations to come together to think about how we can push back against the growing use of internet shutdowns, which became common after the Arab Spring. And so the Keep It On Coalition was born. And since then, we've grown to over 300 organizations around the world. We monitor internet shutdowns. And so we have different projects under the campaign. We have the Shutdown Tracker Optimization Project, which it's a database that we update, we track, we verify all incidents of shutdowns that we are able to come across. And we have this database from 2016 till date. So we just updated it with the 2022 data. So you can see which countries have shut down the internet, what reasons, or what events were happening, or what were the triggers of these internet disruptions. And so since 2016 or 2017, we also have been putting out annual reports to highlight the trends, the developments, the threats and challenges we face, and even successes we see as civil society in this important campaign. So last year's report for 2022 is titled Weapons of Controlled Shields of Impunity, Internet Shutdowns in 2022. And it clearly highlights how much internet shutdowns allow governments to crack down on human rights. And also they do it with so much impunity, because we documented cases of human rights abuses that happened when the internet was shut down in 2022. And so before I go into the findings, just to walk you through how we work as a coalition to push back against shutdowns. Our main objective is to prevent internet shutdowns from happening. But since we are not the governments that impose these shutdowns or the authorities that impose them, we also put together various strategies to be able to push back. And so once an internet shutdown happens, we make sure we name and shame the government behind this shutdown, and also let the world know that this is happening in this country and these are the implications of these internet disruptions. So through advocacy, we use the STOP database to highlight these trends. We share this information with diverse stakeholders around the world that are interested in understanding the issue of internet shutdowns and how they can support the fight. We also have the Shutdown Stories project, where over the years, we've seen that internet shutdowns directly affect people, and the human cost of internet shutdowns cannot be quantified. Like, people rely on the internet for different various reasons. And so once you shut down the internet, each person has a story to tell how it affects them. And so we have given a lot of prominence to that to highlight the human cost of internet shutdowns under this project. And so personal stories to tell the stories of how shutdowns affect people. And then we also use strategic litigation a lot. We've seen some successes. Beginning, it was difficult, but now we see courts willing to pass judgments in favor of civil society and denouncing internet shutdowns. And the most recent success we saw was in Nigeria, when the ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, Court of Justice ruled that the Twitter blocking that happened in Nigeria for over 7 months was unlawful, which was a great win for civil society. And this was the second time the ECOWAS court was ruling denouncing internet shutdowns. And so we think this has really been an important tool for us, and we'll continue to leverage strategic litigation in the fight against shutdowns. And then, of course, we also want to advance norms and build partnerships through corporate and multilateral engagements, be it with regional, international, and multi-stakeholder bodies, to be able to push harder and get government to stop imposing internet shutdowns. And then, of course, we still use RightsCon, where the campaign was born, to go through what we've been working on and how we can expand and strategically continue to push back against internet shutdowns. 2022, we documented 187 internet shutdowns in 35 countries. And 35 countries, this was the highest number of countries we've documented in 1 year since we started this campaign. And that is very concerning. So it tells us that the internet shutdowns, they are spreading, and also 187 shutdowns also reflected the increase in the number of shutdowns. During the pandemic, we saw that the number of shutdowns had decreased. Even with that, we did not think it was a success for the community. It was because governments did not get the opportunity to impose these shutdowns. And so seeing the numbers go up again after the pandemic is really concerning. India was the major perpetrator of internet disruptions for the 5th consecutive year, with 84 internet disruptions. When you look at Ukraine, we had 22 shutdowns happening in Ukraine, but it's important to note that these shutdowns were perpetrated by the Russian military forces during its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And then similarly, we've seen internet shutdowns being used as a military strategy during conflict or crisis situations. And then when you look at the triggers of these shutdowns, a majority of the shutdowns happened as a result of protests. And so protests, governments cracked down on protests using internet shutdowns. And in that, we did document attacks against protesters or people that were denouncing various policies adopted by governments. And then we did also document 33 shutdowns during active conflicts, which is very concerning, 8 exam-related shutdowns, and then election-related shutdowns. There was a reduction in the number of election-related shutdowns in 2022, but we, under the Keep It On campaign, which we have an election watch campaign, we had less countries going to the polls in 2022. And so we want to use this year to see if indeed governments are truly committed to stopping election-related shutdowns. And so this year we are monitoring 17 or 18 shutdowns around the world. And so we would see if governments will keep it on during these important elections. And then one very concerning findings of the report was also the use of internet shutdowns during, so we documented 48 incidents of shutdowns in 14 countries. And all these shutdowns were coinciding with some form of violence against people. And also there were heinous crimes perpetrated against people in these countries, including murder, torture, rape, and apparent war crimes by governments or military forces or security forces, which is very concerning. And this further highlights the fact that internet shutdowns allow perpetrators to cover up human rights abuses with impunity. And that is what has informed the title of this year's reports. And we don't think this is acceptable, and we need all of you to join forces for us to continue to push back against this growing threat. Finally, one important finding that is also very, very concerning is the use of prolonged shutdowns. We have an ongoing internet shutdown in Tigray's region, which started in 2020 when conflict broke out. And with the recent peace agreement signed and governments making commitments or statements to restore internet access, we still have not received information that full internet access has been restored in the Tigray region, which is unacceptable. And it's unbelievable to have a government keep its people out of the digital space for over 787 days. And then similarly in Myanmar, the military has weaponized internet shutdowns. And you see the numbers there, over 500 days of people being cut off or being left in the dark as a result of internet shutdowns. I would move, I've talked about the big offenders. We saw new offenders, unfortunately, Tunisia, and this was the first time we were documenting an internet disruption in Tunisia since 2011, and then Armenia, unfortunately, joined the list of countries weaponizing internet shutdowns. And then an overview of what happened in the regions. So you see Ethiopia, one shutdown, but very concerning shutdown, an ongoing for over two years. And then Myanmar, I've mentioned the Asia Pacific already, Ukraine as well, with Russia using internet shutdowns during its invasion. I'm just going to quickly leave you with some stories. I hope I don't traumatize you with the stories, but you can have a read at the stories just to understand some of the impacts that people share whenever the internet is disrupted. So this is from a young woman from Tigray, and she's based out of the country. And since the conflict broke out, the internet was shut down and she couldn't connect with her family. So that can be very traumatizing. And I'm sure we can all relate to this story. The next one is from Myanmar. And it just highlights the challenges that the people have faced since the military has taken over, and also weaponizing internet shutdowns and other digital attacks in their favor. Okay, so the Keep It On campaign coalition, we continue to push back, and we would leverage the partnerships we've built over the years and the strategies we continue to use to push back against internet shutdowns. These are recommendations from the reports. These are all key stakeholders we engage with, and so it's important for all of us to play our parts and ensure that we bring an end to internet shutdowns. So yeah, these are the recommendations we are moving forward with this year. And then finally, the priorities for 2023. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but we'll continue to work together with the Keep It On community to identify, verify, document, and raise awareness about shutdowns happening in every corner of the world. Very important, because once we don't raise awareness about a shutdown happening, it means it never happened. And so that community or those people will be left to suffer in silence. And so it's important for us to bring that to light. We continue to work closely with election observer groups due to the direct link internet shutdowns has when elections are taking place. And then embassies, diplomatic missions, journalists, and other stakeholders to ensure that they better monitor and track internet shutdowns. This is not just civil society work. We all have a key responsibility to play in that regard. And then, of course, engage with more governments and relevant actors to denounce shutdowns. We've seen an increase in governments speaking up against other governments that are imposing internet shutdowns. And then also, we've had governments make commitments to keep it on during like elections. We saw an example in Kenya last year when the government made several commitments, and indeed the internet was not disrupted. And then we need more and more research into the issues that are intrinsically harming human rights. We've seen a connection with shutdowns and humanitarian aid and service delivery, given that shutdowns are now being used during conflict or crisis situations. And then, of course, we also want to highlight how these shutdowns affect more and more vulnerable groups, including women, persons with disabilities, LGBTQ+ communities. And then, of course, the socio-economic impact this has. One story that I remember that was shared with us was how internet shutdowns can actually prevent women from providing for their families. So they use the internet to start small businesses. And so once you shut down the internet, you interfere with this source of income. And so it directly would affect the family or the dependents of these women. And so I end with that, and let me know if there are questions. And then if not, thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Felicia. This is super helpful and informative, and the data that we've gotten this year is very alarming. And I think when you're drawing on the shutdown stories, it reminded me last year how you had the blog post focused on International Women's Day on the internet shutdown's impact on women. And as you mentioned, the other story, just to go over those impacts, further widening the gender digital divide, deepening existing inequality, and hobbling women's economic development are all mentioned. So definitely encourage audience members to check out that blog post that we published last year for the specific gendered impacts of shutdowns. But I want to open it up to the table. Does anyone have any reactions, concerns, comments of where we're at in this context today with internet shutdowns? Yeah. Well, I could ask, Felicia, you mentioned RightsCon. Oh, you have a hand. Oh, Shahla.
Hi, I'm happy to jump in with a question. First, thank you so much. That was a really informative presentation, and I really appreciate all the tremendous work that goes around the campaign and then gathering all that research. I'm curious a little bit, one of the things that we've seen over time is not only just a greater increase in internet shutdowns, but more targeted and different types, kind of more specification around the shutdowns, from IP blocking to DNS interference, et cetera. I'm curious to get a sense of, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in terms of the types of shutdowns, and have you seen that sort of evolve over the last couple of years?
Yes. Thank you so much for the question. And indeed, the governments are using different types of shutdowns to silence populations. And so we've seen an increased use of mobile internet shutdowns, which clearly makes sense because a lot of places where these shutdowns happen, people rely on mobile to access the internet. And so once you shut down the internet on mobile platforms, it means you're shutting down a whole population, like a majority of the population that relies on that. We've also seen an increase in the use of service-based disruptions. So Facebook, WhatsApp, social media platforms that people use for their daily activities being targeted. And for instance, Facebook is currently blocked in Uganda since 2021 during the elections. And so governments increasingly target platforms that people are using to speak up against them, to mobilize and push back against policies that are not acceptable to the people. And then, of course, we've seen also authorities using curfew-style shutdowns. So shutting down the internet every day at a particular time to interrupt protest or whatever incidents that is happening. And I think there were there was a case in Cuba where we saw one person being blocked to being denied access to the internet. We've also seen like communities, smaller communities, regional communities being targeted. So instead of imposing a national scale shutdown, they would target a specific community or region where maybe there's protest or there's uprising against those in power. So these are some of the trends we've seen. There are lots of them, but these are the few I can highlight.
Thank you so much. And that was Shahla Naimi, a Human Rights Policy Manager at Google Government Affairs and Public Policy Team. Want to open it again? Any questions? I did have one actually, Felicia. Just, I know you've made the recommendations to different stakeholders, including governments, but what message would you want to send to governments today? Those, the big repeated offenders that we keep seeing that continue to shut down the internet.
Okay, I always say that shutting down the internet is like shooting yourself in the foot. So governments should stop imposing internet shutdowns. They are unnecessary, they are disproportionate, and it's a collective punishment for populations. You punish people, you crack down on human rights, which that is contrary to the responsibilities of governments. You're supposed to uphold the rights of your people. And so I would say internet shutdowns can never be justified. They don't solve the issues or the justifications that governments would usually name. Internet shutdowns, they don't restore public safety or order. It makes situations worse. It puts people in danger. It impacts people in diverse ways. And it's an affront to fundamental human rights. So that is my message to governments, and I hope they listen to me.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Felicia. That's very helpful. Seeing as we have no questions from the audience, I think it's good now or do we have any questions? Okay, we'll turn now to our panel sitting at the table today, but also joining online as well. So I'll introduce the panelists first and then go into a round of questions. So further on my left, we have Rebecca Mackinnon, Vice President, Global Advocacy, Wikimedia Foundation. We also have over here, Kiera Wisniewski, Executive Director of Art and Feminism. And then Sandra Aceng, Executive Director of Women of Uganda Network. And again, joining us, Felicia Anthonio, Keep It On Campaign Manager at Access Now. So welcome, happy belated International Women's Day. I'm hoping we could start off going around introducing your own advocacy efforts in light of our theme today and commenting on anything you wish, because this is an informal conversation. Just want to make it open for you to comment on as much as possible. So Rebecca, let's start with you to comment on the impact of internet shutdowns to the free knowledge agenda towards achieving gender equality. I see you as our scene setter for today.
Sure. Also being a little bit of an old lady here, I want to take us back in time to when the planet was under a permanent global internet shutdown, 1995. I was working for CNN in Beijing at the time when China hosted the UN Women's Conference on the outskirts of Beijing. There was not internet access. There was no broadband. There were nobody thought of smartphones at that time. And the conference, while the Chinese government had bid and lobbied to be able to host this UN conference in Beijing, they wanted to get the global PR, but not have ordinary citizens come in contact with global women's NGOs. And of course, the theme of the conference ended up being women's rights are human rights, which at the time was actually a revelation. It's like, wow, right. It seems so obvious to us now. But when Hillary Clinton went and kind of gave this speech saying women's rights are human rights, that was like a huge headline. But what was interesting was that the Chinese government put the site of the conference outside of Beijing in this kind of rural area you couldn't access by public transportation so that ordinary people wouldn't interact with the delegates. But also the Chinese, the local government engaged in what you can only call a disinformation campaign. So flyers were sent to local hotels and taxi companies and neighborhood committees in Beijing, because a lot of the delegates were staying in Beijing before they moved on to the venue, saying that, you know, these are radical feminists coming, and some of them have been known to engage in naked protests. And here's what to do if any of these radical feminists disrobe in your hotel or in your neighborhood, and like, here's a procedure to follow. Right? It was like, what? It was so weird. But then, you know, throughout that, like in the weeks leading up to this conference, you get into a naked women coming, you know, but this was like the way of discrediting the whole thing amongst the local population, while scripting kind of the national and international images of China hosting this big global UN event. And the other thing I would note was that, of course, because there was no internet, the delegates couldn't sort of expose this disinformation campaign or try and disseminate alternative information about who they were to the local public, let alone anyone else. And also, once the conference started, because over the world to report their own story and report their own activities, they were entirely reliant on the international media, the television and newspaper and wire services that came to the event to decide what was newsworthy about what they were doing in the conference. And I heard a lot at the time from a lot of groups who were very annoyed and angry at the angles that the news organizations were taking in covering and only focusing on certain controversies and not focusing at all on their successes. And what this speaks to is an essential part of inclusion, an essential part of exercising your right to free expression, of basically exposing where your rights are being violated and creating opportunities for women and equal amount of space and being heard. It's about your ability to shape your own story, your ability to actually craft your own identity and communicate who you are, what you're doing, what you're about to the world, and have some control over it, right? And that's what kind of brings me to what we're doing at the Wikimedia Foundation and the Wikimedia movement. It was several years before Wikipedia came into being, but a big thing about, of course, the Wikimedia Foundation is the nonprofit that hosts Wikipedia and other volunteer-run projects, and you'll be hearing from Kira, whose Art and Feminism project is a lot about, you know, the narratives. Who are we, and who is represented on Wikipedia and how? And also Sandra, you didn't hear that Sandra is also very active Wikipedian, and again, it's about who is participating in the storytelling, who is crafting the narrative, who is telling the story about identities, and to what extent can we actually, you know, tell that story ourselves. And that's one reason why the Wikimedia Foundation is prioritizing, of course, diversifying and bringing in more women, more gender diverse communities, communities that do not represent kind of the majority patriarchy in different places, so that people are telling their own stories, crafting their own narratives, and what's considered notable, and who is what and what they're about can be told by those communities themselves, rather than shaped by somebody who has some other view of them. And so that's why today I just want to hand the floor over to Kira and Sandra, but also to recognize my colleague, Rachel Arini, who is our senior policy specialist for Asia, based in Jakarta, who's been doing a lot of work, of course, across the Asia Pacific region, and who also helped to organize this event. But just the fact that free expression, enabling access, is so important for women and non-binary communities in particular, because for so many centuries, those with power over communication, transportation, urban infrastructures, travel, and everything else just shaped who we were, what we could be, and where we could be. And thanks to the internet, that changes, and why it's so important to keep it on. So with that, I'll hand it over.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That's a fantastic introduction, scene setting from where we've come from back in 1995 to where we are today, and really getting to the crux of the issue about your ability to shape and own your story and having the internet to do so. That's a nice segue over to Kira, exactly on Rebecca's point about the narrative. As someone, Kira, working at the intersection of art and feminism, what is art and feminism, and how do internet shutdowns affect content creation, especially for, as Rebecca noted, women and non-binary persons and creators?
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, Laura, for the question, and thank you, Rebecca and Felicia, and Sandra and Rachel, and everyone here at Access Now for hosting us today and for joining us online. I'm going to look this way mostly. I'm sorry, it's weird to look at the camera. So to kind of build on a little bit more of what Rebecca was saying, I can kind of zoom out a little bit more and give a few more stats, because Wikipedia might sound very specific. It is. Wikipedia, though, has a well-documented gender gap problem. And so a 2011 report, this is probably what's cited the most, noted that there were less than 10% of contributors who identify as female editing on Wikipedia. A 2018 survey, the numbers improved, but unfortunately not by a ton. On English Wikipedia, about 13.6% identified as female, with 1.7% as other. And so from its own Wikipedia entry, Wikipedia is an online free content encyclopedia project helping to create a world in which everyone can freely share in the sum of all knowledge, which is a beautiful sentence and sentiment. But its influence is really massive. And so this goes into the point of why Wikipedia. So Google, the actual #1 website in the world, your smart devices at home, and then also huge institutions like the Museum of Modern Art, they all scrape Wiki for data. So when there are absences on Wiki, it echoes throughout the entire internet. And so and then going to that storytelling, so when cis and trans women, when non-binary people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are not represented in writing and editing on the 7th most visited website on the world, information about people like us gets misrepresented, skewed, and mistold. We lose out on that history. Art and Feminism really organizes trainings and editathons to help communities include their knowledge and histories on Wikipedia. So Art and Feminism is an international community of information activists committed to closing information gaps related to gender, feminism, and the arts. We're dismantling supremacist systems and creating pathways for everyone to participate in writing history. So from coffee shops to community centers to the largest museums and universities in the world, Art and Feminism leads a do-it-yourself and do-it-with-others campaign that teaches people of all gender identities and expressions to how to edit Wikipedia. So since 2014, over 20,000 people at more than 1,500 events around the world have participated in Art and Feminism events, resulting in the creation or improvement of more than 100,000 articles on Wikipedia and its sister projects. And so actually last year in 2022, research out of the Annenberg School of Communications at Penn State did confirm that feminist interventions on Wikipedia are working, so good. And right now we're celebrating year 10 of Art and Feminism. We have trainings and guides and resources available in multiple languages for information activists around the globe to take action and join us in this work. And so I'll close with a couple key points before passing the mic on. I just want to emphasize that learning and unlearning is really a core value of art and feminism. We've all come up in a misogynistic, racist, colonialist world. And so there's a lot of unlearning to do on all parts. And so we're definitely not like sitting up on some high horse saying that like we're doing it right, because we're going to make mistakes because this is messy work. I also want to uplift that Art and Feminism is one of many projects that are joining us in this work. And we're really happy to be collaborating often with organizations like Whose Knowledge, Black Lunch Table, Wiki Editoria's X, AfroCrowd, just to name a few. And then lastly, really conversations like this are really important because we got to talk about it. We got to work together because we can't do this work alone. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kara. And yeah, we can't do this work alone. So I love this phrase of do it yourself and do it with others and doing it together. So we really appreciate that. And all the work that you're doing to see 100,000 articles is fantastic. Noting that Shahla does have to leave shortly, I did want to hand it over to you briefly if you wanted to make any incoming remarks or comments, both back on the Keep It On presentation or what you've heard of in discussion so far. So over to you, Shahla.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and apologies for the timing on my end. But one thing I'll just sort of pull out from the remarks that I've heard earlier, and thank you, Karen and Rebecca, for sharing, is really looking and focusing on the ways that various gender identities intersect with other issues, and whether that's internet shutdowns, access to information, freedom of expression, the development of dominant narratives, et cetera. I think one of the ways that we look at that at Google is really around gender-based violence. And so maybe as an example, we know that online violence, I think everybody, joining us here today knows that online violence, generally speaking, disproportionately targets women. That's particularly true for women who have public profiles, like journalists, politicians, human rights defenders, of course. They're increasingly under threats, both offline, which Rebecca alluded to, and then also online as well. But it's not just the volume. It's not just a disproportionate volume of violence. It's specific techniques that are used to attack women. And that can be sexist or misogynistic remarks. It can be threats. It can be incitements to, a sexual violence or doxing. It can be a whole host of different things. And so, one of the takeaways that I'm hearing in this conversation is that in whatever we do, we need to ensure that we are looking at the way that gender identities intersect with those issues. When we've been able to do that in the past, we've been able to identify kind of new areas of need and opportunity for us to build products to help keep people safe online. I'll mention, one in particular that I think is relevant to some of the conversations we're having, which is Harassment Manager. So for those that might not be aware, we partnered with UN Women and several nonprofits to open source Harassment Manager, and it's a tool that's specifically designed for female public figures like journalists, as I mentioned, or activists that receive organized campaigns of violence because of the work that they do. And what the tool specifically does, it helps them not only block the sort of sources of that violence, but then also to document it, because we know that in conversations with civil society partners, we know that when they are subject to these types of attacks, it can be extremely helpful to document it, because they can take this evidence to their employer, or, in some cases, if it's depending on where they are and their kind of relationship, to law enforcement, or they can tell their story publicly. And so I'm just sort of flagging that as a particular example, because I think when we look at other lenses and sort of look a little bit more deeply at the intersections between gender, as an example, and kind of broader issues around access to information, freedom of expression, I think we see a lot more nuance. And I think, Kira, you sort of said it perfectly. I'm very grateful for spaces like this, because the only way that we can kind of even begin to tackle some of these challenges and to even identify the issues is through conversations like this. So I'll pause there and just sort of turn it over, because I know other people are on the ground and much closer to this work and have a lot of insights to share.
Well, thank you very much, Shahla, and for sharing your insights, especially from Google and your perspective. And thank you for joining us. We understand that you have to leave, but we're grateful that you could come to the discussion. And we'll do that just just now, actually turning more to on the ground and more in different regional perspectives. So Sandra, over to you. As an executive director of Women of Uganda Network, an NGO that, from my understanding, initiated in May of 2000, so that's a long time, by several women's organizations in Uganda, and you're working to develop the use of ICTs among women as tools to share information and address issues collectively. I'm curious more of your comments, especially from the regional perspective, on this initiative and any insights you want to share in light of today's topics.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. I could start by sharing. I remember in 2021, when we had the national election, this was, I think, the time that I really felt that internet shutdown is something that really takes away the rights that we have as human rights defenders, as activists that really use the internet as a tool to express ourselves, share information. So during the 2021 general election, I remember I was doing election monitoring for an institution, and I was helping with the communications. So out of the blue, the internet was shut down, and we had to start exploring ways of how we can get someone who is not in Uganda to be able to take on the management of the Twitter social media platform. And then, thanks to Felicia, was able to always call and find out, oh, what is happening? Is there a way we can do this? What is the way? But for us, 2021 was different for Uganda because it was the first time whereby we experienced an outrage. Different years, there was blockage, and we were able to use VPN to access and use the internet. So that was different. And what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that when the internet is shut down, it's not the same for Sandra, it's not the same for my mother. When I was able to call my mom that day, she was not able to experience or even feel the pain that the internet is shut down. Yet for me, I had proposals to submit, and I was managing communication for an organization. So all that was altered. So internet shutdown is really worsening the already existing inequalities and the injustices that women suffer. We have different women, gender diverse persons, persons with disability, and the marginalized groups who are already a section of the society that face a lot of power imbalances in the society, and face a lot of social restrictions that use the internet as a means to express themselves, to access information. So when the internet is shut down, that means that some of the groups that are really discriminated in the society, such as the LGBTI communities, are not able to express themselves because the internet is like a tool that they can use to access information, that they can use to access health information, to study, to get relevant information, to freely express themselves. Because it's not the same when they're in the society, they face a lot of discrimination because of who they are and how they identify. So internet shutdown coupled with the different gender digital divide that we already have makes it even worse. We have a lot of online harassment faced by women, and we have already the high cost of the internet. For example, for Uganda, we have 1 GB of internet data that costs about 1.5 USD. It might not be expensive for Sandra, but how about that woman that is in the rural area? How would they feel? Are they even able to access or use the internet? As Kira clearly stated that Wikipedia is the world's largest encyclopedia, is widely used by very many people, as it's an open source. People are able to collaborate. But when the internet is shut down, that means that people are not able to contribute, access relevant information on Wikipedia. So I wanted to highlight that. There are different ways that people access and of course, use the internet. We've had people share their perspective, various people that we talk to, activists, feminists, and human rights defenders who use the internet very prominently. Some use it for to be able to run their businesses, as Felicia also clearly stated. Some use it to access information, maybe on election, freely express themselves online, study online for those who are doing online long distance studies. But when the internet is shut down, that means they're not able to do that. So for the case of Uganda, the government has really been able to use internet shutdowns as a tool to restrict women and men. But for the case of men, for the case of women, they face the issue more because of the already existing gender digital divide that exists on the internet. So I wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandra. It's helpful to have more of the context of what happens during these internet shutdowns. And it really came to fruition, the impact on, different aspects such as education, your job, your career, accessing healthcare information, in addition to what we were saying about expressing ourselves and our opinions. But what also came out in what you were saying was also the impact on intersecting identities, not just being women and girls, but women in all their diversity and their different profound impacts. Felicia, I want to go back to you. You kicked us off with the great presentation at the start. Do you have any follow-ups or reactions or comments you want to further expand on?
Yes, I'll try and add a few. I think everything has been said, but I just wanted to pick on Sandra's points to also emphasize that this is a fight for all of us as women, and I'm really proud to see a lot of these panelists being women. Sometimes I think I would say that it's improving across the globe, but some places we still have to call the men out to stop having manuals and involve more women. I really get upset when I see panels without women. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, how did you even agree on this? So just to tie to what Sandra said, a lot of women are using the internet to build businesses, to make fortunes, to build their career, to access educational opportunities, and just expand their growth. There are some traditional communities where you wouldn't have access to that. Traditionally, if you want to go to school in certain places, your parents would decide that, oh, we think the man or the boys should be in school. The girl, like, you'll be married off, so you don't have to go to school. But with internet, this is information we can access easily. We can use that to update ourselves. We can see what other women are doing and learn from that and just get inspiration from that. And I think there's a direct correlation between financial dependence and domestic abuse or domestic violence. And so once women are getting independence thanks to the internet, exploring, getting to understand their needs and, just building themselves, and other minority groups, I think that governments are also seeing how powerful these tools are, how much power these tools, especially the internet, is giving people around the world. And so they intentionally disrupt it to block access to that. And that is why it's even more important for us to continue to push back and to raise awareness about these things. Nobody will tell our stories for us. Online gender-based violence is something that is really concerning, but a lot of women are speaking up, putting together the evidence. I'm sure some time back you say it and they're like, well, we don't have, where's your proof and all that? But now you see Sandra is monitoring, you see Kira is doing work around that, and other women are documenting this and using that as evidence. And even if it's in courts, we have this evidence to argue and defend our rights. So in all these challenges we are facing, I think internet shutdowns is just one abrupt action that just kills all the efforts we are making. Sandra, I remember during the elections, I was in touch with her, like almost, we used to talk every day. And then the day of the shutdown, elections was happening. I woke up and I just felt this silence, like, so I texted her on her like SMS, and I was like, are you okay? Like, blah, blah, blah. And she said, yes. Should she call me? And I'm like, well, I don't know who is monitoring your phone, so let's not speak on the phone. But then in solidarity, I could feel, at least I could understand what she was going through. I knew she had a lot of things to do. We're working on campaigns together. And so once you shut down the internet, you just kill that efforts that both of us are making to at least contribute to change in the world. Yeah, so internet shutdowns are terrible, they are bad. And I cannot say that enough, but I'm really proud of all the amazing things we are all doing and putting together efforts to raise awareness about these challenges that we are facing as women and as minority communities and people. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia. And I think, yeah, we have really covered the ground a lot on internet shutdowns, but acknowledging that our topic is going much further beyond not just shutdowns, but also being surveilled and spied on. Do any of you have any comments on in what ways the unlawful use of targeted surveillance technologies are threatening the rights to freedom of expression worldwide, and how does surveillance slow our progress towards gender equality? And I open this for the room because I know that there's many of us in the room too, so please don't hesitate to jump in.
May I?
Yes, of course. Yeah, just introduce yourself again.
Yeah. Hi, it's Rachel from the Wikimedia Foundation. I think like hearing all the amazing presentations and discussions, I also want to highlight the indirect but significant impact of the internet shutdown and also surveillance towards women and also non-binary, because Wikipedia is the biggest online encyclopedia dependent to our 280,000 volunteers that are not only producing content, but also using the decentralized content moderation tools. And as Kira mentions, only 13% of that editors are women, and we're having a lot of initiatives to address the gap. However, given the internet shutdown and also surveillance as well as privacy intrusions, it's created a lot of self-censorships and also chilling effect for women, not only those who already been in contested online spaces, but also those who want to enter the internet. So I think we also need to be mindful of the domino effect of this internet shutdown. It's not only affecting the particular country, but also whole regions and also other communities. I think that's that we need to be mindful of. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think the chilling effects that you mentioned is something that hasn't explicitly been brought up, but definitely inferred here today, and a serious concern for human rights around the world. And also the idea of self-censorship, not knowing when you're communicating and then starting to self-censor. Does anyone else want to speak to the issue of targeted surveillance? Oh, hello. Come join.
Can you hear me? Speak myself. So Kat Townsend, I'm coming in from a few different orgs, but one of them is Web Foundation, which has been working with the Women's Rights Online Network, which includes WOW and includes many organizations, gender justice and digital rights organizations from around the world. And actually yesterday we launched our own inventory. Women's Rights Online launched its own inventory of data that has been collected about online gender-based violence. And so there are also inventories of legislation and inventories of company policies. Because we do get a lot of companies that come and say, all right, so how do we do this well? There are many companies where we have to fight them, but some have actually proactively said, well, we don't know what to do. Our policy team isn't that big. So trying to actually meet those organizations where they are so that they can have sort of gender justice by design. To your question specifically, I would recommend looking at Wise for Africa, which are based out of South Africa. They're also a member of Women's Rights Online. There wasn't a specific surveillance technology that was used. They used Twitter. So there was a campaign in South Africa to report violence and harassment, and there's a specific hashtag for it. And the perpetrators then followed that hashtag, worked with the police, de-identified them, and said they must be writing about me and they're lying. And so Wise for Africa actually went through the court system to say, you're not lying, here's all the evidence that they have, and got the courts to overturn it. And it is one of the very few examples where we've actually got the justice system to be on the side of defending gender rights online.
Great, thank you for joining us. It was great to have you join. And I know, yeah, Sandra, did you want to comment?
So in regards to the surveillance, I wanted to highlight one incident that happened in Uganda, and this was, I think, Vegas. So this was used to surveil or monitor a US state's employees. Yeah, so this was even specifically users of iPhone. Yes, so it was a very worrying incident, and I think these are some of the tools that have been employed by the government to monitor specific people of power. And we've had incidents of journalists and politicians who have also reported the same about the surveillance of using the same Pegasus technology. So I wanted to highlight that, but also speaking more to the incident of when internet was shut down. We had the aspect of around, was it 100 VPNs that were blocked in Uganda when the internet was shut down. So this brought a lot of worry for journalists who are trying to use VPN as a way to circumvent and access the internet during shutdown. And of course, if you're not bold enough, you would not use the VPN. And of course, then that would deny you the opportunity to access and use the internet. But also there's the aspect whereby VPN is there's both the free one and the paid one. I think there's one called Thunder. I've ever used that. And you tend to get notification that you're being monitored. And we need to be, of course, aware of what is the tool that you're using, and how powerful is the tool that you're using is able to expose you to various threats, harassment, and threats and abuse as human rights defenders who access and use the internet. So I wanted to add to that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandra. I think that point too on circumvention tools, including VPNs, is really important and kind of links back to this whole discussion on shutdowns, but also the monitoring as well. I kind of want to zoom back out. I know that we've been focusing a lot on some of the topics, but recognizing that this is on the margins of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. Any comments from any of you about what should the international community, including the UN General Assembly? We also have this new initiative of the UN Global Digital Compact process happening. What can these UN bodies or agencies do to address the threats women human rights defenders that we've all discussed today and activists face in exercising their rights to freedom of expression? It's a big question to tackle, but yes, over in the corner, actually. Would you like to come up and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Aida Bokoboza. I'm from Uganda. And I do run an organization called Idea Gender and Technology Initiative. We work around response and gender inclusive technologies. So for me, my response in that regard would be, before we even think about, oftentimes when it comes to such rooms, we talk about strategies and stuff. I do come from Uganda, which is a low developing country. Literacy gap is quite huge. Sandra has already highlighted issues in regards to Sandra, and then there is another woman who is not in the city. We don't have very big cities. We do live in peri-urban and rural areas. I'll give an example. When we did have the election that Sandra highlighted earlier on in 2021, where we had the internet shutdown. To date, there are women who are politicians and journalists in peri-urban and rural areas of Uganda, a few kilometers away from the city, that still do not understand their rights. For me, I feel like in such conversations, we also need to call on service providers who give us this internet. When governments do come, like Felicia mentioned about shooting yourself in the foot. For them, it should be beyond just making the money and business, but also be involved in citizen policies and making sure that the people they serve as beneficiaries, us who pay for those particular data bundles, pay for the internet, to be involved in decision making. So if I'm paying MTN a lot of money to stay on internet, when I get surveilled by government or shut down and censored in a sense, can they also come on board and say, these are people's rights to make sure they can have full access and full participation to internet without, for them looking at as a business, but also as a service to me as a consumer at the end of the day. So that's what I can just make submission to. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. I think that really the private sector actors, the elephant in the room has really been brought up by what you just mentioned, but also what Sandra was mentioning with Pegasus, and then also what Kat was mentioning on the other aspects of engaging with the private sector. So I think that's a really important initiative. And just bringing it back to the Global Digital Compact, the private sector is actually involved as a stakeholder, and part of that process is, I know they had a first informal discussion with the private sector on this very aspect. So it is a good area to get us engaged. But any other comments on this? Yeah. Sandra, back to you.
So I wanted to add on to what Ida said. I think for me, when the government wants to make the internet open, free, I don't want to say safe and secure because I don't know if it is safe. So when we have, for example, the MyUG for Uganda, and when you're trying to connect to this internet, there's a lot of information that is being required for you to access an internet that even do not have the quality that you want to use. So you keep then wondering, what is this information? What will this information be used for? I feel like if the government is giving internet that is free, they also want to, in a way, gain in terms of data that people are using or accessing the internet. So for me, I would like to say that we need to look into that when we are accessing the internet. It should be open, free, safe, and secure for everyone. And we do not want all that data to be collected because we want to be safe as human rights defenders. That's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Yeah, I think those are important caveats, open, free, and ensuring also safe and secure. And on the data protection side, I know that the Global Digital Compact is doing a thematic deep dive exactly on data protection. So encourage everyone to make submissions on that into that relevant UN process. I do, noting that we're almost at time, want to give the opportunity for everyone who was a speaker on the event to make any final conclusions or key takeaways that they had from this discussion. Just listening to others in the room, but also any further expertise or insights on any of the themes we've discussed. So I think I'll go back to Rebecca to start off with.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing, and to speak to your question about recommendations, one thing that's really important is that internet policy making itself be inclusive. Right. So it's not just about, okay, whoever happens to be the leaders and the members of the UN delegations or whatever, just kind of deciding what the policy is and making deals with the companies. But governments have an obligation to ensure that policies related to access and communications, if they are really going to enable and protect and empower everybody across their society, they have to involve different communities in shaping those policies to ensure that they're not putting people at risk, that they're not shutting out voices, that everyone is able to have genuinely equitable access. And of course, the education piece, right? Like knowing how to access, not being dependent on certain family members, or, in some countries, you have, the patriarch who's kind of controlling the technology access in their household. And so how you make sure that, and it's beyond the internet too, it's kind of the social policies, the economic policies, the education policies within society, and embedding the technology policy across that. So yeah, we're just kind of getting started in a way, but we've come some way in the past couple decades.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. I know this inclusivity starts with the policymaking, the delegations themselves. And here at the UN, we not only have the CSW happening, but also the open-ended working group on cyber security, which is really emphasizes gender dynamics as well. And also we participated today in a counterterrorism event, again, emphasizing the importance of gender and education that you captured. Kira, over to you for any final comments specifically on art and feminism.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually building on a couple other points that were made in today's conversation is that it's so great that now that there are panels that are like this, that look like this. I think it's really great to be part of like having inclusive dialogues. And I just want to say, and I don't think this contradicts this at all, that this labor of addressing these gaps should not be on the shoulders of women. It should not be on the shoulders of the BIPOC communities. We need allies, and that doesn't mean we need a bunch of white men talking about it on panels. What we need are people to like actually help us do the work, which is often not glamorous, to like actually make cultural shifts and changes.
Thank you. Felicia.
Yeah, I would say we don't just want to be in the room where the decisions are being made. We need a seat at the table and a microphone unmuted to express ourselves. And so we've passed that stage where we had 100 women in the room or 100 women participated. What exactly were they doing in that participation? Were they able to speak up? Were they able to air their concerns, and were the concerns taken seriously? That is where we want to get to. This year's theme, focusing on innovation and technology, is amazing. And we want to see that reflected on the ground.
Yeah, I think Kira's point about not putting all the burden on women or others is really important. And then your point, not ticking off the box of just we added everyone into the mix and we're good. So I think that's a really key takeaway. Sandra, over to you for the final comment on the panel.
Thank you. So maybe I would like to just urge the government and the private sector that they should ensure that women and girls are able to access and use the internet. And internet access should be something that should be considered as a basic right. The way that woman is able to decide and use the little money that they have for food should be the way that internet access should be guaranteed to the women. It should be something that should be taken as food. Someone is able to access, use it at any time they want, because internet access is a basic human right. And I also want to highlight on the aspect of ownership of some of the policies that we have in place. We have the Rural Communication Development Fund, and this is a very important policy that can really help in closing the digital divide in different countries, but we need ownership by the community. There's a lot of politics around the Rural communication development plan that is owned by some people in the government that the community are not able to really have ownership on. For example, if there's implementation, you tend to see that there's that mayor, there's that politician in the community who is able to decide how where we should have access and use of the internet in the community. And very, very important is that we need to really focus on ensuring that we empower women and girls to be able to take on seriously on network measurement. Felicia? Yes. Whenever I look at the report that I did in 2021 on network measurement, I feel really proud. And it looked really technical for me. And every time I look at it, I smile because I feel it's a powerful tool to be able to quantify and give more evidence on how internet shutdowns really impact different human rights. But of course, looking at the qualifying aspect of the human impact of internet shutdowns, which is very important. But also very importantly, we need to start thinking of how do we then document the impact of internet shutdowns on the different 17 sustainable development goals so that we are able to come together as a group to speak to power, to show more evidence to the government on how the internet shutdowns really impact different sectors in the society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And thank you all for this discussion today. I think it's been very fruitful and very informative, and I'm gonna now look up more on that Rural Communication Development Fund and also hear more of your insights on the network measurement. That's a very good insights to have. In conclusion, just want to acknowledge that internet shutdowns, targeted surveillance, and online gender-based violence, all issues that we've highlighted here today, are becoming go-to tools to silence women human rights defenders, journalists, and activists around the world. This panel discussion has delved into the threats of these of internet shutdown, surveillance, and online gender-based violence. We've showcased how they're being used by power mongers and other actors to clamp down on dissent, invade people's privacy, and directly intimidate women, not only in online, but also offline spaces, and highlighting directly with examples of how women and girls are impacted by these deliberate acts of intimidation and discrimination through the projects or campaigns that we have worked on, not only in these past years, but beyond. So in conclusion, I just want to thank you all today for joining us. Thank all of you online for also joining us as well. And we look forward to keep on fighting the fight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So good.